In this Blender tutorial, we're going to be creating this procedural sand material. Now, if you want to download the project files for this, it's going to be available on my Gumroad and Patreon. I'll leave links in the video description. Now, before we start, I just wanted to show you the setup that I have here. So I have this main light shining on this sphere right here, and then I also have a backlight to get a rim light, and then I just have a camera pointed right at the sphere. And I'm also using an HDRI to get a little more realistic lighting, so if you want to use the same HDRI that I'm using, the link will be in the video description for that. Okay, let's start. So just select whatever object you want to add the sand material onto, and then just click on New. And I'm going to be using the Node Wrangler add-on. If you don't have that enabled, you can go Edit, and then go to Preferences, and then on the add-on tabs right here, you can search for Node Wrangler and just check mark that. Okay, let's close this now. So I'm going to first press Shift A and I'm going to search for a wave texture. We'll just add this wave texture in right here. Now, because I'm putting this texture on a sphere, I'm going to press Control T and add this texture coordinate and mapping node. And I'm going to plug the object up to the vector. Now, if you have like a more flat surface or something that you want to add the sand onto, maybe you're making a desert scene or a beach scene, you may want to use UV and UV unwrap the mesh, or you may just want to leave it at generated, but I'm going to set it to object. Okay, now let's Control Shift and click on the wave texture and we can see what it's doing. I'm going to double tap R and just rotate my sphere around a bit so that we're looking at it from the front, and also rotate it sideways a little bit. Okay, let's change the scale down because I don't want there to be that many waves. And then the distortion, let's turn this up a little bit so that it's a bit more random, so it looks a bit more realistic. And then the detail here, I also want to turn this up just a little bit, not too high, but just give it a little bit more detail right in there. Okay, now let's plug this wave texture up to the normal, and then I'm going to press Shift A, search for a bump node, and we'll drop the bump node in right here and plug this up to the height. So now if I Control Shift and click on the principled, you can now see what it's doing. So it's adding those waves right in there. Now right now it's really sharp. If I zoom in here, you can see that the edges are very sharp, and I want to smooth that out. So to smooth it out, I'll press Shift A. I'm going to search for a color ramp node, and I'll drop the color ramp node right in here. Now if I click on this white tab right here and I make it darker, you can see that it's smoothing out those edges. If I just Control Shift and click on the bump node, you can see what it's doing here. So if I make it darker, it's going to smooth out those edges and eventually just smooth it so much that it's going to be flat. So I just want to make it a bit darker, pretty dark, so that those edges right there are smooth, because this is probably something that, like, if you're making a desert scene, maybe the wind has blown these kind of waves here, or maybe if the tide is coming in, the water going back and forth is making these waves right here. And then also the strength, I think I want to turn this down a bit because it is kind of strong, so I'll turn it a bit more down. Okay, I'm going to Control Shift and click back on this. You can see it's starting to look pretty cool. This base color for the time being, I'm just going to make it kind of a yellowy color, but we'll go ahead later and add more color to that. Now I also want to add some little tiny detail, because you can see on these pictures right up here on the screen that really close up, sand is very detailed and it has lots of different colors and little bits of bump. So to add those little tiny bits of detail, I'm going to press Shift A, search for a noise texture. We'll drop the noise texture underneath the wave, and then I'll plug this vector up to the vector here. Now I want to duplicate this bump so that we can add this noise texture into the bump. So I'll press Shift D, drop it here, and then the factor on the noise texture, I'm going to plug that up to the height. And now you can see it's adding in a lot of detail. Now I want to make this a lot bigger, so I'm going to change this scale to something like 200 so that it has a lot more detail, maybe even more like 250, so that it's very, very detailed. And also the detail right here, I'm going to turn this all the way up to 16 so that it has the maximum amount of detail. Now if you can Control Shift and click on the bump, you can see what it's doing. It's adding in all that little tiny bits of bump there. Now this is actually too strong, so I'm going to turn this down to something like a 0.1 or a 0.2, something like that, so that we can still see that wave texture there. So now if I Control Shift and click back on the principled, you can see what it's doing. If I zoom in here, it's just giving it a little bit of detail. Now it is really starting to look like sand. I think I will turn this strength up a little bit on the first bump. But you can see here in these images that sand has lots of little bits of color. It's mostly usually kind of a yellowish color, but sand is made up of a bunch of little broken up pieces of rock. And so the different rocks are different colors. So there's lots of tiny little variation. So to add these little bits of variation in the texture, I'm going to click on this noise texture, press Shift D to duplicate it and just bring it up here. And then the mapping, I'll plug this into the vector. Now, the factor here, I'm going to plug this into the base color. But you can see that right now, if I Control Shift and click on the noise texture, it's just white and black. So we need to add colors in between that. So I'm going to press Shift A, search for a color ramp node, and I'll just drop the color ramp node right in here and then Control Shift and click on it. Now I found that this color ramp is super important to actually making the texture look good or look bad. So I'm going to be pretty specific to what colors I'm adding and where I'm adding them so that hopefully you'll have the best result possible. So this black value, I'm going to pull it out and I'm going to bring it to a position of about 0.25. You can see right here, there's the position. I'm going to bring it to somewhere around 0.25, and then I'm going to make the color a dark brown color. Now this white one, I'm going to drag it out and bring it to a position at about 0.42 or 0.43, just somewhere around there. And then this white color, I'm going to change this to a kind of a peachy color. Make it pretty bright as you can, not super saturated, just something like that. Okay, now I'm going to click on this plus button. That'll add a new one in there, and you can see this is pretty much the color that I want. I'm going to make it a little bit darker, and then I'm going to drag this one over here, and I'm going to drag it to somewhere around 0.65 or 0.67, so somewhere around there. And then let's add another one, so I'll click on the plus button, bring this over here. This one I want to be kind of a pink, kind of tan, kind of in between pink and peach, I guess. So something like this, and make it pretty bright. And this one I'm going to drag to somewhere around 0.7, so somewhere nearby that. Now let's click on the plus button again. I'm going to add another one, bring it over here. I'm going to put this one somewhere around 0.76, somewhere around there. And then this one, I actually want it to be kind of a very slightly blue-gray color, because some of the little tiny rocks I found, they seem to have a little bit of gray in them, so I'll just bring that to somewhere around there. You can see what this is starting to look like. And then I want to add one more, so click on the plus button, drag this over here. And then this one, I'm going to drag it to somewhere around 0.87, and I'm going to make this one a yellow color. A little bit more yellow, a little bit more saturated, something like that. And then this is how it's looking now. All right, so hopefully your sand looks something like this, something similar. Let me just go back here. Now, if I Control Shift and click on the principle, this is what it's looking like. So if I zoom way in, it doesn't look quite like sand, but looking at it from like this far away, I think it looks a lot like sand. Now, one more thing that I want to do, I want to press Shift D and duplicate this, drop it in here so we have another one, and then I'll take this color and drop it into the height. Now, I don't want this to be too strong, but I will change it to somewhere around 0.25 or something like that. Oh, not 2.5, 0.25. There we go. And now if I zoom way in, you can see it's bumping out that white and pushing in the dark. And if I zoom out here, you can see it looks a lot like sand. Okay, so let's render this out. So I'm going to press F12 to render out the image. All right, it's finished rendering now. So let's click over on this compositing tab. We'll just do a little bit of compositing. And here you can see, if you click on Use Nodes, it's going to have a Render Layers and Composite. And then I'm going to Control Shift and click on the render layers so that we can preview what it's looking like. Now, if this background image is way too big, you're probably going to have to press V to zoom out and Alt V to zoom in. And if you don't see this background image, you can just click on this backdrop and you should see it. Okay, now I want to add a denoise node to smooth it out because it's pretty rough right now. So I'll press Shift A, search for a denoise node, drop it in here between the render layers and composite, and then I'll Control Shift and click on the denoise. And now it's going to smooth it all out. Now, if you want to add a background, I'm going to press Shift A, search for an alpha over. This is totally optional, of course. I'm just going to drop it in here. And then this one, I'm going to plug to the bottom one. And then this white right here, this will be whatever background you want. So in the image that I showed at the starting, I just kind of made it like a blue color, maybe to look like the water from the beach. And then to save this image, I can go over to this rendering tab. And then right here, I can click on this, go to viewer node so that we can see what the viewer node is seeing. And then I can go image and click on save as, and just save that image to my computer. So there we go, that's the procedural sand material. Thank you for watching, I hope this tutorial was helpful. And again, if you want to download the project files and also help support me, there will be my Patreon and Gumroad links in the video description. But thank you for watching, and I'll see you in a future video.